way.
Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And on the other end of the table, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, before we start, I need to ask you an important question. I may have alluded to it earlier, but are you immunized? Is that something that I need to worry about?
Through the process of vaccination, I've been immunized.
Good, because there's a lot of questions that shouldn't have to be questions about the difference between immunizations and vaccinations. So I just wanted to clarify that. We're way too close for it otherwise.
You're right, yeah. You'd be a close contact, keep you out for 10 days.
Nessie is masked, though, so I feel like we're
covered. Yeah.
The youngest one among us here is going to be okay. So welcome to Norse Code. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we are coming to you live from Ireland's forecourts in Arlington, Virginia. Guys, thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for coming out. We got a couple listeners, and importantly, we have the Nova Vikes in the house tonight. And all the thanks in the world to Ireland's forecourts and the Nova Vikes for helping organize this. This is so awesome. We love doing a live show. We love traveling to the away games. This helps make it worth it. Thank you guys so much for coming out. And we do have a show to talk about. We have a Ravens preview to go over. We have to talk about the Aaron Rodgers situation. Actually, not necessarily that we have to. We just really want to.
Yeah.
It's damn necessary at this point. Just as a way of helping cheer up all of the Vikings fans. Literally the last episode was called James's Depression Corner. So I feel like we're going to bipolar that a bit and just run wild.
We're slingshot in the other direction, yeah.
With the Aaron Rodgers situation. And of course, we will go into the mailbag. But before we start, again, thank you guys so much for listening. If you enjoy the show, enjoy the fact that we are ad-free, you can donate to the show in a couple of different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material that you wouldn't otherwise get from the regular feed of the show. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode and donate. That's more of a one-time donation. Or you can be like Damian Barrett in the corner with the hoodie, with the Norse Code hoodie that he's now showing off to the audience. You can go to threadless.com/NorseCode. But the real question is, are you wearing the Christmas socks? Because the Christmas socks is a separate line. Your wife hasn't let you buy the Christmas socks yet. You burned through 5 years worth of goodwill to make it down from New Jersey, but you didn't spring for the Christmas socks yet. Well, Draw Play Dave got his Christmas socks yesterday.
That's right, yeah.
And was showing them off on Twitter. So check it out. Again, norsecode.threadless.com. We're barely making any money on the Threadless stuff. It's just awesome to see merch get put out into the world. So thank you guys so much. A couple of people we need to thank before we start the show. On Patreon, we have 2 new subscribers. Just want to thank Jason Baskin and Colton specifically. Thank you guys so much. The next bonus episode will be up as soon as I figure out what it is I did when I updated the Mac computer that runs all of this in order to get access to my former save file. So the Patreon stuff is coming.
Oh, good.
I was just an idiot and updated. I know not to do that. We also have to thank Colton. Thank you so much, Colton, for doing this. And we are going to thank, on PayPal, Andrew Shad as well. So thank you guys so much. Let's get into the show. Actually, Andrew Shad gave that specifically because he wants to make sure that we're able to do direct flights next time instead of having to puddle jump a bit. Flying from Thief River Falls, Minnesota, home of DigiKey, was an experience. They
don't have direct flights to Baltimore from Thief River Falls?
As it turns out, no. But very nice TSA agent there. He was very happy, as he said, I'm really happy. I'm really looking forward to taking your toothpaste and feeling you up on your way in. So that was only slightly off-putting.
Service with a smile.
That's exactly it. All right, let's get into the show. Let's talk about the Ravens preview, because the 2 pieces of news that are coming out of the Ravens preview before we actually talk about the Ravens includes that Garrett Bradbury, the starting center for the Vikings, is going on the COVID-19 list. He tested positive, and Michael Pierce is going to be back. What's going to happen as a result of the Garrett Bradbury situation? Who is expected to start, and who would be? Is there somebody that would be possibly be a better option for that?
Okay, there's a lot of better options, but none of them are on the roster. So the issue with Garrett Bradbury is that when he tested positive, the Vikings might not have wanted to do a separate transportation thing. So what needs to happen for Bradbury is that he needs to be completely asymptomatic, and then he needs to test negative 24 hours apart. The problem, of course, is that that second negative test would have to occur on a Saturday, which is a travel day, and so he wouldn't be able to travel with the team until he got those test results back. So the Vikings have already ruled him out for the game. So the Vikings don't have their starting center, Garrett Bradbury, for the Ravens game, which means that the center that they traded for from the Cardinals right before the season, Mason Cole, will be the one likely starting at center. There is the possibility that Dakota Dozier, who plays every position, plays for the Vikings. I can't imagine that that's like good news for anybody, but that seems to be kind of what's happening. Mason Cole is, I mean, the Cardinals traded him for a 6th-round pick. He's not great. And his biggest issue at Michigan and with the Cardinals was snapping the ball, which feels like it's an important skill for a center to have. I've told this story a couple of times, but when I was at the Senior Bowl watching centers and watching offensive linemen and scouting them, one of the they have to obviously snap before they get into the drills. One of the offensive linemen receiving the snap would move like a couple feet to the left to take Mason Cole's snaps. And I don't know if he was doing that to be kind to Mason Cole and not exaggerate how far the snap's off, or pointing out to other coaches how much he had to move in order to catch accurate snaps. It was a big issue. It was an issue with the Cardinals. Kyler Murray had to catch a couple of errant snaps from Cole, and of course they wanted to move on from him. Other than that, I mean, he's a below average center in a lot of respects. That's why he's a backup. He's got some athletic movement capability, but nothing like Bradbury. He's probably a bit stronger than Bradbury, which is kind of a low bar. But he probably won't be able to handle a lot of interior pass rush. The good news is that the Ravens don't have much of an interior pass rush this year. It's kind of an unusual year for the Ravens defensively, so maybe he won't show up, but that could be a big problem. The biggest issue is that the Ravens are one of the heaviest blitzing defenses in the league, have been for the last couple of years, and the person calling the protections was Bradbury, and that is one skill that he does have that he's pretty good at, getting the offensive linemen all lined up and making sure that everybody has their assignment in blitzes. And so Mason Cole has to take that over, or Kirk Cousins has to take that over. Either way, it's not the person that usually calls the blitzes, so that's going to be a bit of an issue.
So I suppose the next thing that we need to talk about is who's coming back now for the Vikings. I think I'd also just mention him, but why don't you briefly go over it?
Yeah, so Michael Pierce participated in practice on Wednesday, which is obviously good news. First, you get the revenge game. He was previously a Raven. But beyond that, I mean, he's a really good nose tackle. The Vikings missed him for the past couple of games. The Vikings have had one of the worst rush defenses in the league over the past couple of weeks. That concurs with him being out. I mean, he's a really good nose tackle. He's 360 pounds, and he moves really well. And I think even the Vikings were surprised at how good of a pass rusher he was. So having him out for the past couple of games has been an issue. They've rotated in a couple of other guys. They've moved Alvin Tomlinson from the other defensive tackle position to nose tackle for a little bit, which was okay. They've had Armin Watts, who played well last week, but not the week before that. They've had James Lynch play a little bit, but it's not the same as having Michael Pierce back. So we don't know if he's 100% back because he didn't participate in practice today on Thursday. He just did stretches, so I don't know if he re-aggravated his elbow or anything like that, but it does look like he's on track to play. We don't know yet. Everson Griffin didn't participate in practice. Harrison Smith didn't participate in practice. Looks like both of them just took rest days. It's not like an injury thing, so we're likely to see them. Anthony Barr was limited in practice. He's dealing with a tendonitis issue that was revealed earlier in the season, so he's just going to rest every so often, I guess. I don't know. So we don't know whether or not we'll see Anthony Barr. And then Cameron Dantzler, who has to play a lot now that Patrick Peterson is out, was also a limited participant because of his ankle. But that's an upgrade over Wednesday when he didn't practice at all. So there's a lot of important injuries, but for the most part, I think the Vikings are a little bit healthier than they were 2-3 weeks ago, so we might see more players than we did in those games.
Well, you can't talk about the Ravens without talking about Lamar Jackson. There's actually a question. There was actually a question in the mailbag that asked whether or not the Vikings could win this game, seeing as how Lamar Jackson wasn't actually mentioned as injured or hurt.
Yeah, without a backup quarterback, the Vikings have a great chance.
Exactly. So obviously the Vikings have problems with mobile quarterbacks. This seems to be something that's been a problem since time immemorial.
At least Steve Young.
At least since Steve Young, yeah. So what exactly are the Vikings looking at as far as the offensive line and their protection with Lamar Jackson? And is he currently listed as still like 4th or 5th in most yards overall?
Yeah, so he is top 10 in rushing yards, top 7 or something like that in passing yards. He leads the Ravens in rushing yards, and they're one of the few offenses that can be really efficient when they're running the ball, obviously because of who he is. And a lot of that has to do with just the fact that when the quarterback is a running threat, that's another player you have to account for. In addition to the running back, you have to assign another player to deal with that problem. And the thing is, the way the Ravens design the run game around Lamar Jackson is so much more complicated than a lot of the other run games that we see. So, Robert Griffin with Washington, Colin Kaepernick with San Francisco, other running quarterbacks that we've seen around the NFL, their run games were kind of one-dimensional. They would do 1 or 2 different plays that feature the quarterback, whereas the Ravens will do everything. They'll steal plays from Oklahoma. They'll steal plays from Oregon. They'll steal plays from the old Philadelphia Eagles offense. They'll steal plays from everywhere. And Greg Roman was the one who actually helped design the Colin Kaepernick offense back in San Francisco. And so, he's had, a decade of just designing plays for running quarterbacks. So they've got one of the more complicated running offenses in the NFL. They execute it to a T, of course. Opponents don't have the same experience that they do. And so the fact that they steal stuff from like Georgia Tech, the fact that they steal stuff from like Army and Navy, and a bunch of other offenses around the NFL makes it really difficult. And then, of course, Lamar Jackson is like one of the most elusive players in the NFL with the ball in his hands. So the fact that they've got a really good scheme for creating effective quarterback runs, and then they've got one of the most effective runners of the football, makes it so difficult for defenses to get a hold of him. So obviously, the Vikings have to make sure that they maintain a lot of discipline. The biggest problem is that the most common approaches or responses to quarterback runs or option football, stuff that was developed at Stanford, stuff that was developed at Baylor, all of that stuff is kind of like the first step in the process. It's the first part of the arms race. So, for example, on a read option, the quarterback is going to take the ball and then mesh with the running back and to decide whether or not to give it to the running back based off of an unblocked player that the quarterback is reading, which is why it's called the read option. And if that player, usually a defensive end, attacks the running back, the quarterback keeps the ball and takes the ball to where that defensive end was. If that defensive end attacks the quarterback, then that player will give the ball to the running back, and then the running back has an extra lane because now the defensive end is attacking the wrong player. So it makes that defender wrong in every instance. So ways defenses have decided to respond to that is to always make that defensive end attack the running back and then move a linebacker over. It's called a scrape exchange. Move a linebacker over and then have that linebacker always attack the quarterback. And so now you've got somebody accounting for everybody. Well, the Ravens saw that a decade ago when the Packers tried that, or not the Ravens, Greg Roman saw that a decade ago when the Packers tried that against Colin Kaepernick. And so what they did, and if you'll remember, Colin Kaepernick ran for like 200 yards against the Packers. So what they did is that they brought a tight end or a fullback from the opposite side of the formation, and they just had him hit a guy. They had him hit whoever was the defensive end, whoever was the read guy, and now they bought back that blocker. And so as the arms race has kind of continued, Greg Roman has always stayed a step ahead. And so the Vikings are going to have to do a lot that they won't have to do in any other game this year, right? Because Kyler Murray is a good runner, but he's a scrambling quarterback. They don't design their runs around what he can do. So the Vikings are going to have to very quickly teach all of their players like a graduate level course in option football, and then they have to forget all of that next week when they play the Chargers. So it's going to be really difficult. They do have players on the roster that have very recently played option teams, like Patrick Jones, who's probably going to replace Daniil Hunter now that he's on IR. He played against a lot of option teams in the ACC, specifically Georgia Tech. Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks at UCLA played Oregon back when Marcus Mariota was doing option stuff. We've seen Baylor, James Lynch, the defensive tackle, played against Oklahoma, which they do something called a GT counter, where they pull the guard and the tackle from the opposite side of the formation and add blockers. It's so complicated, but you've got players that have experience with it, so that might be what they do. And the problem, of course, is that on top of all of this, Lamar Jackson's really good at throwing the ball. And so if you bring in extra defenders into the box, now they're going to run for explosive plays. They've got Hollywood Brown, who he dropped a bunch of passes in the Detroit game, but then he hasn't dropped a pass in any other game. They're the deepest throwing offense in the NFL. Lamar Jackson is accurate throwing deep. Now they've got former Gopher Rashad Bateman, who's been playing really well the last 2 games. It's going to be really tough. The fact that Lamar Jackson happens to be accurate, happens to be good at reading defenses, happens to have a really powerful arm, is going to make it really difficult for the Vikings to find a way to both stop the run and the pass. So that's the most difficult part of this whole thing, is that quarterback is extremely difficult to tackle, and they've designed a really good scheme around what he can do.
Well, I'm glad that this is happening in a year that the Vikings defense is doing so well.
Hopefully Anthony Barr's healthy, because they might spy the quarterback on a couple of plays, and he's usually that guy. We don't know if he will be. Without Danielle Hunter, who did a really good job against option football when he was at LSU, and with the Vikings, he's a really great run defender. Without Danielle Hunter, it's going to be really tough maintaining both a pass rush presence and a run defense presence. Everson Griffin has just been really bad against the option, and he's really good at a lot of things. He's good at general run defense. He's good at rushing the passer, especially this year. But he's been really bad at option football. So hopefully they can find a way to make sure that that's not a huge problem for him.
So I guess my next question is, which unfortunate soul is the running back for Baltimore now? Because it ran through the gamut of a million ACL tears. So who is currently the one that's, I guess, on the waiting list?
Yeah, it's like the Spinal Tap drummer.
Yes.
Right now they've got a stable of a bunch of running backs that were really good in 2016. They've got Latavius Murray. They've got Le'Veon Bell. They've got they added Devonta Freeman, and then they've got an undrafted player. I think it's his second year in Tyson Williams, who is probably their most explosive player, but he wasn't even active for the last game, so it sounds like they don't want to use him that much. He's not very good at pass protection. He's pretty hesitant in his reads. So they like these veterans because they're really good at pass protection, and the Ravens' offensive line is a lot weaker than it has been in the past couple of years. But those running backs aren't really all that good anymore. Like Latavius Murray, former Viking, is a really good pass protector, but he's just not explosive. Like, he doesn't get you 5 yards when it's blocked up for 3. He'll really only get 3 or 4 yards a pop. He might get 5 if it's blocked up really well, but it's just kind of not there for them. This is the first year that Ravens running backs have not been consistently really good at getting extra yards. So, the way the Ravens running back situation is, one of them is probably going to get hurt. That's just been happening. My bet is on Devonta Freeman. I don't know. But, Devonta Freeman's been probably a pretty good pass blocker, but you'll probably see a lot of Latavius Murray because they're really worried about the way that offensive line is blocking.
Well, it's good that Latavius Murray is finally getting his shot. When he went to Minnesota, his whole thing was, I want to be the number one running back. Yeah,
that didn't happen.
It didn't happen. So then he went to the Saints, and that's when the Saints picked up their guy. So it's nice, I guess, to see that he's finally being the number one running back somewhere. But it is kind of an ugly situation. Yeah, no, it's pretty ugly. They've got one running back with explosive talent, and they don't trust him to do much. He fumbled a couple of carries a couple weeks ago, too. So we don't even know if Tyson Williams is going to be active, but he's the only one that's got the ability to really crack off 20, 30-yard runs on that roster. So let's talk more about the wide receivers, because you mentioned Hollywood Brown and his drop problem, but it seems to be kind of fixed itself a bit lately. But who else are the targets on the for the throws anyway of Lamar Jackson? Yeah, so normally they'd have Sammy Watkins. It looks like he's too injured to play in this game. He'd be a really good supplement to what they do. But Rashad Bateman went off. He had 80 yards against Cincinnati 2 weeks ago. He's been a pretty good addition to their offense. So they've got those two receivers. They've got a really good returner in Devin Duvernay, who's probably one of the better punt returners in the NFL. He's doing all right, but
honestly, I mean, the Ravens, like, they just haven't been able to create good receivers over the past couple of years. And so the fact that they seem to have some premier receivers now is nice, but it also means they don't have a ton of depth. I mean, they just drafted Tylan Wallace, who's a really good route runner, but I don't know, they've got like 7 receivers, and they don't really trust a lot of them to do much, especially with Sammy Watkins hurt. So you're probably going to see a lot of Rashad Bateman, a lot of Marquise Brown. They don't put 3 receivers on the field very often. The only time they did it was against the Colts when they were behind a lot, and they had to run a bunch of no huddle. They had to throw the ball a lot. That was a game they lost, by the way. They don't have the receiver depth to put 3 on the field at the same time.
What happened to them last week exactly? The score didn't seem real. Just looking at the fact that they had lost.
I mean, the issue for them has been how bad that offensive line has turned into. They've had a couple of injuries. So at left tackle, they had Ronnie Stanley, who was only healthy for 1 week. He re-injured his ankle. So they moved Alejandro Villanueva, who they signed. He's previously with the Steelers. They had him at right tackle, where he was awful. And then they had to move him to left tackle after the Ronnie Stanley injury, and he's not been that great there. And so they had Patrick McCarry at right tackle, and he's like an undrafted second-year player too. He was really good, but then he got injured. And so now they're playing Tyree Phillips, I think, at right tackle, and they've said openly, like, we think he's a guard, which is like not like good news for the way that right tackle position is developing. Ben Cleveland has been hurt too. That's the guard that they drafted this year. Bozeman is their center, and he's been pretty good, except he kind of has the Mason Cole problem, where he's not used to snapping the ball. He previously was a guard, and so some of those snaps will just kind of run errant. But yeah, they've been running through these offensive linemen, and as a result, they've been kind of below average. Ben Powers, I think, is going to be too injured to play, so we might see Tristan Colon-Castillo in this game. But yeah, a lot of the run blocking that they were doing really well with Ronnie Stanley and Orlando Brown, now that neither of them are there, both because Orlando Brown's with the Chiefs and Ronnie Stanley's hurt, it's just not available for them. They just can't do a lot of it. And so Lamar Jackson's been under a lot of pressure, a lot more pressure than he's used to having. The run blocking's not there, so he's getting hit in the backfield a little bit more often. That's kind of what's been happening. And then the Ravens defense is way worse than it was last year or 2 years ago. It's still all right, but it's a significantly different defense. And so now that the Ravens have to play from behind a lot more often because that defense is not doing so well, they can't run the ball as much, and that's obviously what they're the best at. So that's kind of why you're seeing them drop some of these games.
So we've talked about pretty much every other position other than the tight end. Is he getting any help with it? Is he getting any help at all there?
Yeah, now that Mark Andrews is back, I mean, he's a pretty high-level receiving tight end. He got 1,000 yards or nearly 1,000 yards 2 years ago, but he was hurt last year. This year, he's been a high-level target. He's been really great at matchups against linebackers. And they had an injury with Nick Boyle, who's a really good blocking tight end. But he was put on injured reserve a couple weeks ago. He was put on the designated to return list very recently, and he's been practicing. He hasn't been activated yet, but he could be activated for game day. That would be really good because they had to sign Josh Oliver, who's like fine. Like, he's not that great of a tight end. But he's not bad either. But that's kind of, they've been running the offense through, having a fullback, having a tight end. They've been putting only 2 receivers out there, so sometimes they put an extra offensive lineman on the field. But really the only tight end that's been effective for them has been Mark Andrews. We might see Mark Boyle for this game.
Well, let's talk about the Vikings defense here for just a moment, because you'd mentioned Everson Griffin being bad in the option. You'd mentioned what about the corners exactly? Like, are we going to be in a situation where
that's going to be rough?
Where Breeland's going to be put?
That's not ideal. With Patrick Peterson on IR, and even if he was healthy, the Vikings just don't have a cornerback that's fast, like just purely fast. And so they can't deal with deep speed. We saw this in the preseason when they got burned by like basically every Denver Broncos receiver because they all run 4-3.
Man, that was ugly.
It was bad. They had so many 4-3 receivers that they traded one away to the Lions. Like, they just had too many. Well, Hollywood Brown is one of those 4-3 receivers, and Rashad Bateman's not slow. And so they've got a huge problem with deep balls. And now that Patrick Peterson isn't healthy, you've got to put Cameron Dancer out there, who ever since he added weight in the offseason has looked a lot slower. He's committed a couple more penalties. He looked really good in the 16 snaps he took against the Cardinals. He didn't look all that great 2 weeks ago, or last week. And he's just been kind of giving up extra space, and it's just he can't really add weight and maintain speed. Like when he ran the 4.38 at his fake pro day, he weighed like 140 pounds. Like he's not a football weight, right? And so the Vikings want him to be above 180 so that he doesn't get injured. I mean, his rookie, he was injured 3 different times, and so they're like, well, you got to have some muscle or you're going to die. And so he did that, and now he can't run. And so they don't have speed, and so they're going to have like Xavier Woods up top, always capping on top of Hollywood Brown. They're going to have Harrison Smith out of the box a little bit more often, which of course is a problem because the Ravens run the ball a lot. If you don't have that safety down in the box, now you don't have that extra run defender to deal with the extra runner. So that's the fundamental issue the Ravens present. And the best way to respond to that is to have corners match up one-on-one against the receivers. And the receivers aren't like amazing, like I said. So normally that can be a solution that defenses have. But when it's Bashaud Breeland, who's been making mistake after mistake, he's had like one good game this year, and Cameron Dantzler, who was benched for Bashaud Breeland, there's just not a lot of options. So that's the concern. If the Vikings are going to win defensively, it's going to be with their defensive line, even without Danielle Hunter.
You know, you'd mentioned Harrison Smith. Has Harrison Smith talked at all about the allegations that he attempted to choke out a cowboy on the sidelines this week?
No, I think he's been silent on that.
That's too bad because the video evidence is a bit damning.
It was pretty good. I mean, bad. It was very bad.
I mean, a lot of these players go off and train with Jay Glazer in the off season or whatever, do some MMA stuff. I mean, if it would have been on the field of play, it might have been okay, but the fact that it was on the sidelines?
Yeah, one could consider that assault in certain circumstances, yeah.
Most, yeah.
Most
as it turns out.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the other side of the ball then, and we can talk about the porous offensive line for the Vikings going up against this Ravens defense. I guess my first question is, how are the Ravens going to stop the Kirk Cousins check down machine?
I think so. Cousins had a lot of deep balls available to him against the Cowboys. He decided not to take them. So this isn't a Clint Kubiak problem. There were deep throws available. Receivers were running routes downfield. Cousins decided not to throw them. So the issue is whether or not Cousins is going to be aggressive. Last year he was. He was kind of a top 10 deep ball passer despite his reputation. He does throw the ball deep, but he didn't against Dallas. He had one of the most check-down-oriented games I've seen from like a non-Christian Ponder quarterback. It was awful. Hopefully in this game, they take advantage of some of the matchups they get. The problem is, of course, the offensive line has to hold up so that Cousins can hold on to the ball long enough so that receivers get open deep. But you're going to need to find ways to get open against Marcus Peters, who's been really good. The Ravens have had injuries at cornerback, so Anthony Averett is out there a lot more often. He's had some really good games. He's had some really bad games. I would trust Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson up against him. So I would imagine that they would I would trust KJ Osborne against him. I would imagine that they would get open against Anthony Averett. But the Ravens play with a bunch of different defensive backs. With Jimmy Smith hurt, with Tavon Young hurt, with I think Marlon Humphrey, has had some lingering issues. With all of the injuries that they've had, they've had to kind of adapt, put 3 safeties on the field, have some safeties play slot corner. I know Brandon Stevens does this sometimes. Chuck Clark plays a little bit in the box and sometimes in the slot. Deshaun Elliott is mostly their free safety, but they don't have a true free safety like they did obviously with Ed Reed, which kind of a lofty comparison. But even Eric Weddle did a lot more free safety, and so they've had to mix a lot of coverages. They used to have one really high safety who would patrol the center field, take care of a bunch of deep passes. Now they've got 2 high safeties a lot. They've got, they play cover 3, they mix coverages a lot more than they used to. And I think that's because their safeties are good, not great, and they used to trust that they had great safeties. And so I would imagine that the Vikings receiving corps has a pretty huge advantage against everybody except for Humphrey. But for the most part, they should find open space. Cousins just has to take the shots. The shots were available to him last week. He didn't take them. He has to take the shots this week. And I don't know, whatever it is, I'm not super optimistic most of the time. Whatever it is, I feel like he will. I think he probably just got hammered for it in game review. this past week, and so my guess is that he'll take those deep shots. But yeah, the secondary for the Ravens is usually very impressive. This year it's been hurt a lot, and so they just don't have the bodies to match up. So I would absolutely trust Justin Jefferson to win one-on-one matchups when he gets them.
And which is kind of weird because you don't often see Kirk Cousins go for contested balls. Like he's really not big on that. He threw, 2 last game?
Yeah, and they were both kind of in the first drive.
As it turns out.
And one of them was to Tyler Conklin. It wasn't even to Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson. They're two really great contested catchers. You're up against, Anthony Brown is not a really good cornerback. He didn't throw that. I understand not testing the interception leader, Trevon Diggs, when he's got tight coverage. That makes sense, fine. But, Anthony Brown is not good. If you're open against him, he's not going to catch up. And Dan Chisna played, 2 snaps. He doesn't play football. He was a track star at Penn State. He played football for 4 snaps at Penn State, got 1 deep ball. The Vikings signed him as an undrafted free agent, and because Justin Jefferson was hurt for a couple of snaps in that game, Dan Chisna got some snaps, and he got open against Anthony Brown. The guy doesn't know how to play football. If you can get open against Anthony Brown, you should probably throw it, and if you've got Justin Jefferson or Adam Thielen doing it, you should definitely throw it. So some of these matchups definitely favor the Vikings receivers. He has to just trust it more. That's basically it.
So what about the tight ends? Are we actually going to be able to see a game with Conklin doing well, or is this going to be another game where Kirk Cousins just forgets that he exists and just checks down to C.J. Ham?
He'll check down to C.J. Ham. There's no question about that. The Ravens linebackers are kind of in an interesting spot. They had to sign undrafted free agent Josh Bynes again. They originally signed him off the Cardinals, played him last year. He played well. They cut him. He was on the Panthers. Then they signed him after the Panthers cut him. And he's actually been kind of good for them. And what's kind of embarrassing for them is that he might be their best linebacker because Patrick Queen has just not been playing very well at all. And, in fact, they've reduced his snaps so that he's off the field when the Ravens put extra defensive backs on there. They've also got Malik Harrison out there. And Josh Bynes ran a 4.8 140 a decade ago, and he might be their fastest on-field linebacker. If you put all of the linebackers in a race, he would lose. But in terms of getting to the ball quickly or finding out where to go, he gets there faster than Patrick Queen. He gets there faster than Malik Harrison. And Malik Harrison's really fast. He ran a 4.3, but he doesn't know what he's looking at half the time. And so this is kind of a rare situation where without a really good linebacker group, the Vikings might be able to open up tight ends against them, especially the fact that Luke Stocker or whoever they signed 2 weeks ago is on the field and he's doing all right. It'd be kind of funny if you got 3 catches in the game. Do it.
So who's going to make Garrett Bradbury's replacement look like an idiot?
Calais Campbell. He's having a really good year. He's playing a top-level interior defender. He sometimes plays on the edge, but he'll loop into the center all the time, and you have to be a really aware center in order to kind of deal with what Calais Campbell does. And Mason Cole is, again, fine for a backup, but the awareness is not the same level as Bradbury. Bradbury will pick up these guys. Whether or not he'll win when he picks them up is different, but he'll pick up these guys. And if Mason Cole doesn't do that, that's going to be kind of a huge problem. So Campbell is playing really well, and they're getting some good snaps out of Justin Houston at the edge. There's some games where he's playing really well, some games he's not. If you compared Everson Griffin, who's another veteran, older edge rusher, Griffin's having a much better season, but he'll get something every so often. They're just not getting as much of around the other kind of interior defensive linemen. So Brandon Williams, for example, has been a pretty good nose tackle. I mean, he was good enough that the Ravens decided to let Michael Pierce go, to have the Vikings sign him, and he just hasn't been playing very well this year. So there are some opportunities there. But the real issue is their first-round draft pick, Odafe Owe. He's super explosive, and he's got 3 sacks this year. He's already their sack leader. And the scary thing about him is that he also doesn't know how to play football, kind of like Dan Chisna, except he doesn't need to know. He's just so athletic that he can just get into the backfield. So he'll probably line up against Christian Darrisaw and against Brian O'Neill. Both of them are probably better pure football players, but he's such a good athlete that he might get into the backfield and cause some problems. So That's kind of the issue, is that they've got some opportunities for a pass rush, but their interior defensive line mostly consists of just Calais Campbell. The rest of that group has been pretty disappointing. I'm talking down a lot of this Ravens group. They're not playing awful. They're just playing below the standard that the Ravens defense typically plays.
So, what exactly are the Vikings going to need to do outside of the entire Ravens team catching COVID? What do the Vikings need to do in order to actually win this game on Sunday?
So I said that Lamar Jackson's really good at throwing the ball, and he is. But I think that you win by making sure that he doesn't run. And the reason I think that is not because they're more efficient running the ball than throwing the ball. They're like every team; they're more efficient throwing the ball. But because I remember the Vikings. Like, I know what Michael Vick did to them. I know what Steve Young did to them. I know what Colin Kaepernick has done to them. I know what running quarterbacks do to the Vikings. And I just feel like if Lamar Jackson has enough runs, he'll pop off a 70-yard touchdown. And so they need to find ways to contain him. Maybe they can even tighten their rush lanes, not leave open huge gaps, study what LSU did against some pretty good running quarterbacks when they've dealt with them. And make sure that there just aren't run lanes available to Jackson, and force him to throw, because even though I don't trust what those corners can do against those receivers, I know that if you've got Xavier Woods and Harrison Smith, and you force Lamar Jackson to hold on to the ball long enough without being able to move around in the pocket, you might be able to win some of those offensive line matchups. So I think the way that they win is not necessarily by running all over that Baltimore defense. I think it's just by limiting the explosiveness. You won't be able to stop it, but limiting the explosiveness of that Ravens offense.
Any hope?
I mean, I had the Vikings losing this game, so. I mean, there's definitely hope. I mean, if the Vikings.
Let's go Vikings!
I've got Nessie right here, so I mean we can talk about the optimism thing here.
Well, okay, so when the Vikings have been like double-digit favorites, they've lost. When they've been double-digit underdogs, they've won. They're a weird team to deal with. So I can see the path for a Vikings win. I guess there's hope, but I don't. Harbaugh's a better coach. Like I don't really see the easiest path for victory there. It'd be fun to watch a win, though.
Before we end up talking about the Aaron Rodgers stuff, just a quick aside on what's happened since our last recording, because you'd kind of broken down the possibilities as far as what the Vikings could do. Should they fire Zimmer now? Should they wait to fire Zimmer? Should they have a fire sale? Should they trade people? Should we be trading in or out? In the end, the Vikings did nothing.
That's right. They didn't do anything at the trade deadline. Mike Zimmer said that they tried to do something at the trade deadline and couldn't. I don't know what that means. Spielman has a history of generally overvaluing their own players. So he wouldn't trade Kyle Rudolph when there was a second-round pick offered for him. He wouldn't trade Trey Waynes when there was a second-round pick offered for him. And I imagine that something along those lines happened. I bet teams called about Cameron Dantzler, for example, because he's like cornerback 4, right? And some teams probably see something in them that they like. And I bet the Vikings said no because Patrick Peterson's hurt and they tend to overvalue their own players. But then also the Vikings they don't really have a great sense mid-season of what trades are worth. So when they try to acquire a player, they either shoot too high or way too low. And they don't end up with a lot of good deals. Like the Unique Ngakoue deal is a good example. The Chris Herndon deal is a good example. Even the Sam Bradford deal is a good example. And you could kind of understand why that even happened in the first place. But also, when they have tried to acquire players and couldn't, other teams have done a better job. Like, why would you trade for Chris Herndon when you could have traded for Dallas Goedert? I mean, that trade for Goddard was a pretty good deal, and they weren't in the market for that apparently. So they tried to trade for someone. I'm guessing they tried to trade for an edge rusher or something. There were a couple on the market. I'm guessing they didn't try to trade for Von Miller, who only went for a second and a third, but there's only 1 year left on his contract, so it's kind of difficult to figure out kind of what went on there. But I don't know, like it probably wouldn't have been an amazing deal if they traded for Von Miller, but it also would have been fun as hell. So I would have liked to watch it. But yeah, they didn't make any moves. They didn't sell any of their players. They didn't buy any players. It was pretty boring.
It's almost too bad the Vikings didn't end up doing something. I mean, I'm positive that someone in Minnesota would have been happy to volunteer a little bit of money toward his Halloween party. Like, of all dumb rumors that have come out of his trade, that ended up being one of them.
Yeah, the rumor that Von Miller poisoned the locker room by asking teammates to contribute towards a Halloween party. I don't know. He had Migos lined up. It was an expensive Halloween party. But he also makes $17 million a year. Some of his teammates also make a lot of money, I hear. I guess partway through the season, I guess he texted Noah Fant and was like, "Hey, we're losing games. I don't know if a Halloween party makes sense." Noah Fant said, "Yeah, I guess you're right." And then he decided to go forward with the Halloween party, and some players, including Noah Fant, decided they didn't want to do it. And Fant used some weirdly holier than thou language, something about my morals, which is it's a party, relax. But Fant still paid, even though he didn't go, and he said he wanted to pay. So I have no idea what's going on. Halloween parties are obviously the theme of this news cycle, so that had to happen.
Well, let's talk about a Halloween party.
Sure.
Because we can talk about what happened with Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers,
the costume, right? You wanted to talk about his costume as John Wick?
He spent this whole offseason saying, "Trust me, Halloween is going to be what this all builds toward." Not kidding. That was his explanation for the hair, the beard, and everything. That was going to be the thing.
The thing with the hair is that you can have long hair without it looking gross. That's I don't understand why it had to look like that for him to pay it off for the Halloween costume.
He just wanted to get as much angst as humanly possible. He wanted the look of somebody who just had his dog killed.
Well, that's fair. Well, that's the character he was playing,
That
John
was
Wick.
the character he was playing, John Wick. So he just wanted that level of just disheveled.
Yeah. And he did look that sad. That good acting.
He did look that sad after the loss to New Orleans week 1.
Yeah, and he just kind of carried that with him.
So Aaron Rodgers is in a whole mess of trouble at the moment. The Green Bay Packers are in a whole mess of trouble at the moment, thanks to the Halloween incident. We might as well call it the Halloween incident at this point.
It's a couple Halloween incidents.
Yeah, so Aaron Rodgers tested positive for COVID.
Where it was then revealed.
And it was revealed at that point that he is unvaccinated. And there was talk at the beginning of the season, because he's such a good leader.
Right.
Because he's such a good leader that he had gone out and been vaccinated. But it turns out that there's a bit of a turn of a phrase there, that he was intentionally leading reporters to believe that he was something that he wasn't.
Right. So reporters asked him outright, as most reporters did for most quarterbacks around the NFL, "Are you vaccinated?" And Aaron Rodgers said, "Yeah, I'm immunized." And the fact that he said yeah, first of all, in response to the question, obviously there's a verbal tick there, you might just say that in response to it, but the fact that he said yeah, I'm immunized, he was clearly intending to mislead reporters on that one, and everybody kind of assumed that that's what he was talking about, but then he added on top of that, because he said that he doesn't judge those players who are not vaccinated. They can make their own decisions, which very clearly demarcates him as outside of that group of those players. He continued to mislead reporters on this question when he said he was immunized, and it ended up being really important. So actually, I'm going to dial back a little bit. The Packers participated in this, and they helped Aaron Rodgers construct this weird narrative that he was vaccinated. And the way that they did this was they made sure that every vaccinated player or unvaccinated player did press availability over Zoom, while every vaccinated player and also Aaron Rodgers had press availability in person, which very strongly implies, of course, that Aaron Rodgers is vaccinated, like all of the other players that they're talking to, and unlike the players that were on Zoom. They also continued to take photos for their Twitter and their Instagram of him traveling with the team. Now, it's entirely possible that he traveled separately, and then they brought him out onto the tarmac, and they took a picture of him in front of the team plane to make it seem like he traveled with the team. That seems like a lot of work to conceal. There's unvaccinated players in the NFL. It's not it's a weird thing to participate in as part of this elaborate ruse.
Right.
And so he and the Packers kind of led this on. While the Packers knew he wasn't vaccinated, the NFL knew he wasn't vaccinated, and the way that they knew, I mean, obviously they know because players have to disclose that information to the NFL by the CBA, but the way that he kind of disclosed to the NFL is that he requested that he be considered vaccinated for the purposes of the protocols because he took homeopathic treatments from his personal doctor to increase his antibodies. And I don't know if he took an antibody test. There is a provision in the CBA that kind of accounts for this, whereas if you've previously contracted COVID, you can be considered vaccinated if you only take one shot instead of two, which does match a lot of the studies about immunity and your ability to spread and severity and so on and so forth. But in order for that to happen, in order for you to be considered vaccinated, if you've only had one shot but you've previously contracted COVID, you have to take an antibody test or the test for the specific spike protein which is in the vaccine, and it has to be at a particular concentration, like 100 U per milliliter or something like that. I don't know. There's a number, and you have to meet that number. And I think Rodgers wanted to take the test, but because he didn't have the vaccine, the specific spike protein in the vaccine was not any antibody that he built up for, if he even built up any antibodies through his homeopathic whatever. There obviously have been tests about homeopathic methods to increase antibodies. Those papers have all concluded that they don't really work for obvious reasons. We wouldn't call them homeopathic if they were tested and they worked. We just call it medicine. Right. And so the biggest concern here is that we don't know kind of what, I shouldn't say biggest concern. The weirdest concern is that we don't know what method he used to increase purportedly his antibodies. But there are a couple of people that I've seen, like people speculating. We don't know that this is a fact, right? But people speculating that one way he did it was to get a blood transfusion from people who do have antibodies. Again, I don't know that this is I'm not saying he did that. I'm saying that people are speculating that this is something that in like Facebook groups about homeopathic medicine about COVID have talked about doing. So I don't know, but he did specifically talk about how his antibody count was up. So I'm just saying it's on the table that he has a blood boy.
Which is just a fun sentence to say, really.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And then there's also a discussion about whether or not there's some form of clay that he was eating in order to
Okay, yeah. We don't know that he's eating clay, but the reason that we think that he might be eating clay, a sentence I have to say, is because the person he's in a relationship with, Shailene Woodley, who's like in Divergent and like a bunch of other movies, kind of known for being the not Jennifer Lawrence, which is unfair to her, but that's what she's known for. She's like very into homeopathy, right? And so she has done interviews with like Vogue and a bunch of other magazines about her lifestyle, which includes like going out into the forest and gathering her own spring water, which like sounds nice but is actually pretty dangerous. And then also, like she says, we make our own medicine. This was back in like 2017. We make our own medicine, like go out into the forest and make your own medicine, which like is more dangerous than the spring water thing, I think. And like she just like talks about this stuff. And then in one interview, she was like, "Yeah, I was talking to a cab driver," and then she had an aside like, "Make sure you talk to your cab drivers because they have stories," which is like a weird, like, sure, I guess. I don't know if I talked to a cab driver about medical advice though. Anyway, the cab driver told her that
Wait, like yellow cab or Uber?
It doesn't matter. I don't know. Like it could be a yellow cab.
If it turns out Lyft is where you're supposed to go for your.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. No, right. Yeah. Well, the Lyft loyalty program. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. If he paid for a medallion, props to him.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he told her that where he's from, and I mean, she could be making this story up, right? Like but that pregnant women eat clay. And she was like, "Oh, okay, let me look into that, I guess." And so she did her own research and found out that clay is, according to her, negatively charged and therefore absorbs ions. and it's an antioxidant, I guess. But then also it attaches itself to heavy metals in your body, and it helps draw heavy metals out. And the part that's true is that your body doesn't process clay, so it will just like go out. So there's that. I don't know that any of this is related to the vaccine stuff, but like this is who he's dating, and he also attempted to have homeopathic treatment for COVID. Like that fits. Right? And it's entirely possible that he has eaten clay for other reasons not related to COVID, but also maybe reasons related to COVID.
Which really just puts me in a spot where I have to ask this question. And I love the fact that I have to ask this question, especially because it's Aaron Rodgers. Is Aaron Rodgers just a more successful version of Jay Cutler?
It's kind of true, right? Like, the more time goes on, the less personable Aaron Rodgers is. And I know to Vikings fans, he's, like, not personable. But, like, to the NFL at large, people liked him, and now they don't, right? He's got, especially with the way he grew out his hair for that costume for some reason, he's got a very, like, don't care attitude that's very Jay Cutler. Jay Cutler is also openly anti-vax. Not just about the COVID vaccine, but, like, vaccines. So, you know, there's that. Jay Cutler, you know, made it to an NFC Championship game before getting injured. I mean, Aaron Rodgers only has one ring. I don't know. There's like you can match them, right? So, yeah, he's a more successful Aaron Rodgers or Jay Cutler.
Jay Cutler is that's still ridiculously
If you began photoshopping cigarettes onto Aaron Rodgers' face today, it would totally fit, just like it always did for Jay Cutler.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
No, but here's something that was pointed out by NFL Reddit today.
Always a good sentence.
So, according to the COVID agreement, those who are unvaccinated are not supposed to be in advertisements, or not supposed to be like
kind of.
So break this down for us.
The agreement says that unvaccinated players can't participate in marketing events. And a lot of us, when we originally read this part of the agreement, thought that they couldn't be in marketing, which means that they couldn't be in advertising. And I never got clarification from the league, but my understanding is actually that they can't go to like promotional events in the public, right? And so they can't be part of like, you know, what we're doing right now. Like they can't, you know, go to like promote a beer at a bar with like a bunch of people, right? In fact, they can't like be out in public, which of course is why that Halloween party, back full circle, matters, right? Because if you're not vaccinated, the maximum number of people that you can hang out with is 3 if they're not in your family, and they have to be on the team, I guess. I don't know. And then also on away games, you have to stay in your hotel unless it's for like a gym-related reason or a health-related reason or food or something along those lines. So if he had a Halloween party and there were more than 3 people there and they weren't in his family, which we know that they weren't because it's Aaron Rodgers and he doesn't talk to his family, then he's been violating protocol. And the thing is, the fine for violating COVID protocol is $15,000 for the first offense, but it actually escalates. And it can go all the way to that week's game check. And if he's been violating protocol every single week, he's losing the game check that he just negotiated with the Packers to increase after he was holding out so that he could get traded to the Broncos or wherever, right? So, big loser move there. We don't know that he's been violating protocol. The Packers say that he isn't. The NFL is investigating. The fact that he had an in-person press conference is kind of like up in the air. And the reason that one's kind of confusing to me is because I'd never really considered that to be COVID violation, because otherwise there are like a number of Vikings players that have done indoor press conferences without a mask in front of reporters.
Well, we had just talked about that at the very beginning of last episode.
Right.
In what counts as a COVID violation and what doesn't, as far as interviews and all that. So it would appear anyway that the league needs to say what you are and are not supposed to do especially in regards to what's happening with Aaron Rodgers.
It would not be surprising that the league was unclear about these rules. This is well within the history and tradition of the NFL.
I am shocked to hear there is gambling going on in this casino. I am absolutely shocked to hear that the NFL was being purposefully vague about anything.
Right.
And as we were talking pre-show, we were talking pre-show about how the Packers went out and signed a potential backup or a potential person to start over Jordan Love. Arif, who did they sign, and what is he famous for?
Well, he's famous for being Blake Bortles, right?
Well, yes. In addition to in addition to being famous for being the guy who would block you on Twitter for sending Blake Bortles a message saying, "Hey, good game, thanks, you're doing a great job," block.
Yeah, both him and Blaine Gabbert. There's something about Jacksonville quarterbacks.
Yeah, Jacksonville quarterbacks just
instantly block you on Twitter, even if you compliment them. First of all, Blake Bortles is famous initially for being just a huge goof in Jacksonville and also being bad at football. But when he was with the Broncos, he was party to a scheme that the Broncos hatched, or I should say the Broncos quarterbacks hatched. And I can't say this as if I'm reporting it, but I think that it may be the case that it is possible that's enough conditionals, that Blake Bortles conceived of the idea to take the trackers off their wrists and move them to the corners of the quarterback room so they could all sit together. And when the NFL reviewed the security footage after there was a close contact, they had found out that all of the quarterbacks had violated NFL COVID protocol last year, and they were all therefore super high-risk contacts, which means that the Broncos couldn't play a quarterback in that game where they played Kendall Hinton, a receiver, at quarterback, but also Royce Freeman, the running back, which the Broncos were so confident in Kendall Hinton that they lobbied the NFL to change the rules to allow one of their coaches to play quarterback instead. Anyway, that's Blake Bortles' fault, probably.
Just amazing stuff, and the whole. And somebody here had said it too. It's like they're clearly looking for innovation.
Right. Yeah. So they brought the leader in innovation in evading COVID protocols into the building in response to Aaron Rodgers testing positive and not being available for next week's game. You love to see it. Obviously, he'll kind of help the Packers lead the field in avoiding the COVID protocols and avoiding triggering the COVID protocols. You'd love to see innovation in the field. Football is always changing, and kind of these new offenses and new ways to avoid NFL rules. The Packers are kind of at the head of the pack, as it were. So we'd love to see it. They signed Blake Bortles. It could be that Jordan Love plays instead of Blake Bortles. In fact, I think that's more likely because they just signed him, right? But Bortles was on their offseason roster. He knows the offense. Either way, when asked if Jordan Love was ready, Packers coach Matt LaFleur said, "I guess we'll find out," which to me is an enormous vote of confidence.
Oh my goodness.
And that's going to be a fun game to watch.
Yeah, we've joked before about the existence of the bad quarterback league for fantasy.
That's right,
and when your coach says, "I guess we'll see," that is fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic news. But as far as Aaron Rodgers stuff moving forward, I mean, Aaron Rodgers has to be really upset with himself for a couple of reasons. One, he's done a lot to attempt to kind of rehab his image over this year. He's watched what the PR team has done with Tom Brady, making him look like a human, making him look like a human you like.
Well, in the right lighting.
In the right lighting, yes. He still looks like a cyborg, but I'm just saying that they've done a lot of work. And watching Aaron Rodgers just sitting here going, "I ate all this clay for nothing," has got to be one of the more frustrating. In times like this, personally, I would go to my family for assistance. If only that were an option for him. So we've got all this, and that's. If Vikings fans can glean anything from all of this, it's that at least we had a quarterback who was open about it and didn't, spend his time lying to us through vagaries. Anybody who's been in a terrible relationship knows that lying through omission is still lying.
Oh yeah, well, especially if you know that they believe the thing you want them to believe, and you let them continue to believe. That is just lying. There's no way around it.
It's a darn shame. You hate to see it, but you love to see it.
Oh, yeah. It is possible if Rodgers is symptomatic that he misses 2 games instead of 1, but technically he comes off COVID protocol next Saturday. If he is not symptomatic and he has 2 consecutive negative tests 24 hours apart, so he would be able to play Sunday of the following game, but he wouldn't be able to practice, which, I mean, that's probably not an issue. I mean, he played the last game without, like, receivers, so I don't know. But if he's symptomatic for even 1 day, it is possible that he doesn't play the next week as well.
Yeah. Our first mailbag question, let's just get right into the mailbag here, and we'll take some questions here from the audience in just a second. First mailbag question, oddly enough, is from the audience. It's from Damian Barrett, who asks, question for Arif's existential/literal corner, what am I doing here?
Okay, so like in a broad sense, we're all accidents, and we have to find meaning in that ourselves. And I think that's beautiful because then we can construct our own meaning. But specifically, you drove here from like New Jersey or something?
I think he took a train, actually.
Oh, you took a train from. Well, that's better. So that is what you are doing physically here. But you know, the rules are made up. Find what you enjoy. I don't know why it's the Vikings. It seems like a bad decision. But that's what we're doing here.
He cashed in, according to him, he cashed in 5 years of goodwill with his wife to come out here, and now the bank is at 0.
That was a terrible decision. I mean, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. It's great to have fans of the show here at the live show.
Especially really an MVP.
Envisions, yeah, one of the MVPs among our patrons. So I really appreciate it. It makes for a great atmosphere, and I'm glad that you felt that it was that valuable.
Let's go to Raul, who asks, number 1, what has happened to our run game? Are we running less outside zone? The interior offense seems even worse than previous seasons.
Okay, so first, the interior offensive line is definitely not worse than last year. Last year's was atrocious. But aside from the first 2 games of the season, Oli Udoh is struggling a lot. He had a much better game this last week against Dallas than he did in the previous several stretches of games, but he still incurred a penalty. He still gave up a lot of pressure. So that is an issue. The interior offensive line is an issue. Ezra Cleveland is playing all right, except against Dallas. He gave up some pretty important pressure. He missed some blocks in the run game. But the last year's offensive line, the interior was much worse. This year, the issue actually, I think, more has to do with the running backs, and that includes Dalvin Cook. So some of it, obviously, is that Alexander Mattison had to play, and he's just not as good a back as Dalvin Cook. Some of the snaps where we saw Dalvin Cook play, he was clearly still nursing an ankle injury, so he wasn't as explosive. At the beginning of the year, I thought Dalvin Cook was playing well. Against Dallas, I don't think he was playing as if he was injured. He didn't feel like he was slowed down by the ankle injury. But specifically for this game, he seemed a lot more hesitant in his reads. He wasn't planting and going. When a hole opened up, he didn't take it right away. He didn't trust some of the blocks that were there for him, which I understand. The blocking's not great, but if you're calling particular plays, especially wide zone plays, you need to kind of trust that blocking or that play's never going to work. So I think Cook in the last game had some issues kind of just pulling the trigger, which is not a problem he typically has. So that's some of it. But I think there are some positives. I think C.J. Ham, I think, is playing a little bit better than he typically does at fullback, which is really good to see. Brian O'Neill is playing much better as a run blocker than we've ever seen him play. So there are positives. Christian Darrisaw's a huge upgrade over Rashad Hill. So there are some positives there, but I think Dalvin Cook just has to kind of trust himself the way he did at the beginning of the season, and I think that run game will kind of reemerge.
Also from Raul, on our last 2 playoff seasons, we were in the top 10 in both points for and against. Right now, we're 18th and 12th in those categories, respectively. It's clear that we have the best quarterback of Zimmer's tenure, but is he the right quarterback to pair with a conservative coaching staff? My theory is we won more with an inferior quarterback in Keenum because he had a much more aggressive playing style. If we pair Cousins with a much more aggressive coaching staff, will we see similar success?
So if you sat Zimmer down and asked for him to describe his ideal offense, it would actually be the offense that we kind of saw last year. It would include, of course, a lot of running the ball, but it would include a lot of deep shots. He loves explosive plays. He loves deep shots. He just doesn't like throwing the ball a lot, which means that he doesn't like throwing a bunch of short passes. Now, he obviously likes it when quarterbacks don't turn the ball over, but if you asked him what kind of passing offense he would want, it would be play-action-oriented, deep shot offense that looked a lot like the ones that we had in the previous 2 seasons. So it's not necessarily that it's just conservative play calling that Zimmer wants. That said, Cousins has to be more aggressive than he was last week, and he has been that aggressive in the past. Again, when Justin Jefferson became a starter in week 3 onward, he was willing to target him. The same thing with Adam Thielen 2 years ago and last year. So there are elements of that offense where it's aggressive. It's just this year, the Vikings have decided to run play action a lot less because teams have an answer for it, and so they've had to get rid of the ball quicker because the offensive line's not very good at pass protection, and so the throw depth is just very short, and Cousins kind of bought into that a little bit too much. So that's a big element of it. I don't think if you paired Cousins with a more aggressive coaching staff, you'd see a bunch of success. There is a really good, or I shouldn't say good, but an interesting quote from Jay Gruden when he was the head coach at Washington, that where they asked Gruden, the evidently not racist one, I guess. I guess jury's out. We don't know.
He was still working for the Washington football team.
Yeah, we don't know. But reporters asked Gruden, why isn't Cousins throwing some of these deep shots? And Gruden was like really frustrated. He basically just said, I can't scheme receivers open every play. He has to throw those plays. He has to throw them open or something along those lines. And Cousins was asked about it, and of course he was like very non-confrontational, like he always is. And he's just like, I like to go through my reads and find out what's open, and take what the defense gives me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that Cousins, in a more aggressive offense, would, because of the way the plays are designed, probably be a little bit more aggressive, but would still take the easiest throw available to him in a lot of situations. So I don't know that a more aggressive coaching staff would make Cousins more aggressive. He just needs to do it, and he has done it in the past. He did it last year, right? And so he just needs to find a way to do it. It seems like he's really comfortable in play action, but because teams have been sending the defensive lineman after the quarterback on play action a lot more nowadays, the Vikings have been kind of loath to call it. And so they're kind of in this no man's land where they want Cousins to throw deep on these plays, but he's not protected by the run action like he normally is. So I don't know, man. Cousins is, I guess, a better quarterback. Well, I mean, he's obviously a better quarterback than Keenum. You just take a look at the past 5 years of both of them playing. But that doesn't mean he's necessarily the right quarterback for a deep shot offense. Like, Ryan Tannehill is often compared to Cousins because they run the same offense, but Tannehill is a lot more improvisational. He's a lot more loose. He's a lot more willing to take some of these shots, even though his arm is worse than Cousins. He's not as accurate. His arm isn't as strong as Cousins, but he'll take some of these deep shots, and that's why the Titans were like, yeah, let's bring Julio Jones in here to replace Corey Davis and pair him with A.J. Brown. Let's bring in, Josh Reynolds. Let's promote Westbrook-Akine, who takes, these aggressive actions against zones. Like, they know that with the play-action-oriented offense, if they've got good enough receivers, that Tannehill will throw to them. So I think that Cousins is at home in a play-action-oriented offense, but I think play-action is becoming less effective, and you need to find a quarterback that is maybe a little bit looser when it comes, which Case Keenum absolutely was. He was very improvisational. He was very loose, holding onto the ball until the last second, that sort of thing. So I don't know that you can find a quarterback-coach pair that kind of works with the same style of defense and offense the Vikings have. It's just kind of this weird no man's land right now.
Well, we're going to do one more question here and then go into the audience. So if you have a question in the audience, hold on to it for just a second. But the next question is from the Oli
Udon Noodle Stand.
Oli Udon Noodle Stand asks, is Udo's performance poor enough for me to have to rescind my stand-up?
Yeah, probably. He's not playing well. He played better against Dallas than he has in a bit, so he's clearly improving, but he doesn't really know how to play guard. He knows how to play tackle.
Yeah.
And that's kind of showing up. So, yeah, I would say you'd rescind the these Twitter accounts named after players, they're always weird to me, man. This one's kind of funny, so it's not as bad. But, yeah, just hold a bit on the Oli Udoh fandom, I think.
All right, well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a question from the audience. So if you have a question, I have a microphone here. If anybody is willing to come up and ask a question here. Damien, I'm looking in your direction. Help me out here, Damien.
So, earlier in the season, you declared the Ravens and the Chiefs of playing a different sport. Given what's happened since, do you still stand by that? And how do you think the Vikings will match up on Sunday?
When watching the Ravens and the Chiefs early in the season, it very much seemed like they were at a higher level of football, such that they weren't even playing the same sport. And it very much still feels like they are not playing the same game as the Vikings are, right? When you watch them and they're insane, low probability, high risk, high reward throws. But obviously it's not working out for them as much as it has in the past. So there are vulnerabilities there. It's kind of weird that the best teams in the NFL right now all seem to be in the NFC when we previously thought they were in the AFC, except for the Bills. They're fantastic right now. They're vulnerable, but it still feels like you're not watching the same sport when you watch the Ravens play or when you watch the Chiefs play, because they're so willing to live in the chaos, which is what football likes to be. And the Vikings try very much to avoid that as much as possible on both sides of the ball. So, yeah, they're playing a different sport, but at least you can maybe beat them now, which wasn't the case before.
Let's go to mailbag. Let's go back to Twitter for a second. Skull or whatever asks, what are some of your favorite sleepers in the 2022 Vikings head coach sweepstakes?
Favorite? I don't know. I haven't been doing that much research into future coaches because whoever they hire, right? And it's not going to – it almost doesn't matter because how good they are at being an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator has very little relationship to how good they are as a head coach. I've talked a lot about Kellen Moore. He's not really a sleeper. A lot of people think that he's kind of the next head coach to show up. I don't know. Dave Tube is a special teams coordinator. He's been the special teams coordinator for 3 different organizations, Kansas City, Chicago Bears, and the San Francisco 49ers. He's also been an assistant head coach. Given how successful John Harbaugh is with the Ravens as a special teams coach, he's somebody that might be worth looking into. Special teams are notoriously unpredictable from year to year, except for Dave Tube, who always has a good special teams unit. So if I was going to pick the deep sleeper, it might be him. But I don't really look that much into coaching candidates until like week 14.
Let's go to Josh, who asks, in the offseason, it seemed like Everson coming back was a long shot, and here he is, seeming like near prime Griffin. He has now assured us that when the Vikings win out, they will be 13-4. My question is, when this happens, will Zimmer, Spielman, and Cousins all be extended? If the Vikings go on a tear here,
if they go on a 10-game winning streak or whatever, I think they'll be extended. Even Cousins. I think because Cousins has a cap at $45 million next year, I think if they go on a 10-game winning streak and take the top seed, you don't really need an extension for Spielman because he's got, I think, 2 years plus this year left on his contract, and that might be true also for Zimmer. So really the only extension that you'd be looking for would be Cousins. And I don't know, I can't think of anything more Vikings than going on a 10-game winning streak and then losing in the first round of the playoffs. Like that, and then the extension coming. Like that feels very Vikings to me.
That's pretty close to one of the more Vikings things that could possibly happen, actually.
Yeah.
Nolan Kaler asks, when Case Cookus wins 2 games in a row for the Packers, after he is signed, do we just all resign our fandom on the spot, or do we go to the pitchforks?
Case Cookus.
Case Cookus.
That's my only answer.
Do we have any other questions from the audience here? Hi there.
Hi, I'm Jason.
Hi, Jason.
I've grown up a Vikings fan, and every time we play really good running quarterbacks, I've seen Michael Vick run a really big long run. RG3 did it to us. So does Lamar Jackson get a nice run on us? If so, how much? How long of the run? And is it enough to get Mike Zimmer fired?
I don't know that one individual run would do it. Maybe 3. I'm going to stick with my prediction that if the Vikings don't find a way to stop Lamar from running the ball either through a scramble or designed run, that there's going to be a 70-yard run in there, and it's going to be a touchdown, There's nothing you can do about it. I think that would be Lamar Jackson's longest run of the season too, which is like very in keeping. Like Steve Young's best run ever was against the Vikings. Mike Vick's, yeah.
RJ3, all three.
RJ3, yeah. Mike Vick was the one that made the Vikings run into each other. Yeah. Incredible. I mean, beautiful, except you're cheering for the Vikings. But yeah.
Things can be both objectively beautiful and objectively horrifying.
I've been.
So it's possible anyway. No, what's fun, and Reef has mentioned it too, is you still have that level of fandom while covering the team for national like broadcasts and stuff. At the same, so you still get frustrated when the Vikings do dumb things.
Like run on second and long.
Instead of just viewing it purely as I wish the team was more fun to write about, it's also I wish the team was better just for my own personal enjoyment and sanity.
Yeah, because I have to watch this team every week, and if they're not good, it sucks to watch, right? So and if they make dumb decisions, it sucks to watch even more. And they'll slog through these bad games. That's no fun.
Yeah, and this season is turning into a real barn burner on and all of that.
Christ.
So it's like, really? Do I have to watch this until the very last drive again? Ricardo asks, in an effort to distract myself from the events of Sunday, I've been thinking about the Vikings kicking situation. I'll pause here for a moment to allow the fact that I'm using the Minnesota kicking game to distract from a recent horror. Sweet irony. Now, on a recent show, Arif brought up Joseph's field goal percentage and how it is real low by league standards. I was wondering if the reason was, or if the reason they have stuck with him has more to do with his ability to not let his misses snowball. It seems to be decent. He seems to be decent at this, or has at least been on the right side of the variance a few times.
That is kind of like the base fundamental skill that you ask of a kicker, though, right? Like all of the kickers that are good don't let misses snowball, and so the fact that Greg Joseph doesn't let misses snowball, which I don't know if that's true because he missed a couple of kicks, multiple kicks in the same game multiple times. So I don't even know if he doesn't let that happen. But even if that's true, you can't miss a lot of kicks at different times anyway. Like when he misses the kicks, obviously is important. But if he does it a lot, I don't care that he doesn't do it a lot in a row. He's just not doing it a lot, right? His mental fortitude is great. That's important to have in a kicker. It's hard to find. That's why teams go through a bunch of kickers. But that is a base level job requirement, right? Like that's asking a secretary if they're literate. Like that, you just have to be able to do it.
It's just a thing that's expected.
Yeah, and so we asked Spielman like halfway through the season, like, hey, why Greg Joseph? Right? So we technically asked, like, hey, are you happy with the performance of special teams? But he took it as, why are you sticking with Greg Joseph? Which is good, because that is actually what we were asking. And he just said, yeah, we love, he's got a really big leg, he's got a strong kick, which is, like, true, he can kick the ball real far. But, they're working, the problem is that the special teams coordinators almost always handle the personnel side, and if they think they can fix a kicker, they'll hold on to that guy for a long time. The whole reason that the Vikings drafted Blair Walsh is because they thought that they could fix his mechanics, and I guess for his rookie year they did, but they weren't fixed permanently enough. So,
I think that might be one of the bigger understatements we've ever had on this show, is talking about that. So, Andrew Shad asks, if stadiums exist on a spectrum, with factories of sadness on one end, Paul Brown Stadium, First Energy, etc., and shining success on the other, Lambeau and Gillette Stadium, where do the Vikings' current and past stadiums fit?
Well, I guess the Met, actually, despite the fact that the Vikings have, never won a Super Bowl and their Super Bowl runs occurred while they were playing at the Met, I don't know that I would call that one a factory of sadness. There were a bunch of really great games there. Also, the hot air balloon crash, so I guess there are some elements there that are, but that one is kind of legendary. I mean, it shows up in NFL films all the time, and there are all kinds of stories about playing at the Met. Even players for the Buffalo Bills thought it was nuts playing at the Met. So I think that one is kind of not in the Factory of Sadness level. The Metrodome, I think, is closer to that. Obviously, there were some really great Vikings teams that played in the Metrodome, but like when you ask fans of other teams what the Metrodome represents to them, they'll talk about, pumped-in stadium noise. They'll talk about the whether or not fans were blowing for the Twins when the Twins were playing in there in certain directions. I mean, they'll talk about like cheating, right? And they'll also talk about like how weirdly sterile the stadium looked, which fair enough, until you went to the bathroom, in which case it looked like the exact opposite. But then also, how it is difficult to walk into the stadium because it was blowing you out at the same time. It's a very weird stadium.
Anytime you left the Metrodome, you had to literally hold onto your hat. So
Yeah. People would lose hats all the time. And so that one I think is kind of closer, but it's not quite the actual Factory of Sadness, Paul Brown Stadium, right? So it's not there, but I think it's, if you were to divide it into two, it would be in that half. US Bank Stadium is new enough, right? Obviously, the Vikings had an opportunity to play in a Super Bowl at US Bank Stadium, and they squandered it. And so there's that. But, like, people love US Bank Stadium. They absolutely love it. Fans of other teams talk about how cool it is, that the Skull chant kind of reverberates throughout the stadium. They talk about how it's well-designed to create a bunch of sound, how it's nice. Because there are some stadiums that are closed off that aren't very loud because the fans are further away from the field, and there are some stadiums where the fans are like uncomfortably, almost dangerously close to the players in the field, and US Bank seems to, I guess, strike a good balance. It also is very striking, right? Like, obviously most stadiums kind of dominate their skylines, and some of them do it in ways that like kind of suck, like the Kingdome or the Metrodome, but the US Bank Stadium, unless you were like actually politically opposed to US Bank Stadium, which, fair enough, most people that I've talked to think it looks great in the Minneapolis skyline. So I think until the Vikings lose more, which well within the realm of possibility, I think that one is kind of, maybe not a shrine to success, but if you look at stadium rankings, it's like up there, right? Like people will rank it number 4, number 5, number 6. And so if it becomes host to successful Vikings teams, I think you're very likely to find it on that other end. And then I guess the TCF Bank Stadium is technically a Viking stadium. That's all the way on the other end. The Factory of Sadness.
Yeah, that one has a real nasty playoff loss in it, and
it's got a nasty playoff loss. It's got some streak enders there, like for Brett Favre.
Yep. But US Bank Stadium has the Minneapolis Miracle, so
yeah,
it ends up being ranked a little bit higher. Don from Ohio asks, "How are the bingo halls in Virginia?"
How are the bingo halls in Virginia?
I don't know, but apparently you can play bingo.
This is
here.
one. Yeah.
Apparently you can play bingo here. Kyle Slaby asks, "Will Hollywood Brown have more drops or touchdowns against this struggling cornerback room?"
He has 2 or 3 drops on the season and 5 touchdowns of 20 yards or more. Not just touchdowns, like of 20 yards or more. So probably that one. But Cameron Dancer has this like weird ability where he loses a rep and then the receiver drops the ball. And of course he celebrates it because that's what cornerbacks do. But if that continues, fantastic, and it could very well continue if he's healthy enough to play in this game. But I'm guessing Brown has more touchdowns than drops in this game.
I think I'm going to take the opposite side. I think Brown is going to get his drops back.
He's going to get them, but he's going to rediscover them.
He's going to rediscover his drops. He's going to end up with something like 2 drops and 1 touchdown, and I'm going to laugh maniacally on Sunday.
That would be, I mean, that Lions game where he dropped like 3, specifically in the end zone, 3 balls in the end zone, to almost have the winless Lions beat the Ravens were it not for a record-setting field goal. That game was very funny and frustrating. Also, I had Hollywood on one of my fantasy teams, so mostly frustrating.
Yeah, that. Do we have any other questions from the audience before we finish up here? All right. You hand that there.
Adam.
What's up, Adam?
Nice to meet you guys. So I've been a Vikings fan for a long time, and of late I have joined the Fire Zimmer bandwagon, and I was reluctant to do that because we, those of us who have been Vikings fans, going back to the 80s and 90s, like we know that things can always get worse, right?
Yeah.
But I guess fundamentally I'm on the fire Zimmer bandwagon because it just seems like the players, that whole like play to not lose sort of energy that the players project seems to kind of unfold year after year under him. Whether it's, kickers that are otherwise successful but then come play for the Vikings and just suck, or these last minute sort of comeback drives that suddenly the defense falls apart on. It just feels like our players are not inspired. And is there some like analytical explanation for that, or is it just like he lacks soft skills? What's going on with Zimmer's coaching that is not instilling confidence in our players? Any theories?
It's really interesting because if you try to find like evidence for it, aside from the fact that there was one game against the Packers where the defensive backs mutinied and called their own coverages, which is not a good look. But if you look at kind of all of this other evidence, it seems as if players love Zimmer, right? When they go to other teams, they come back, right? Anthony Barr flipped on the Jets to.
Is it just defensive players that love Zimmer, or is it?
Well, okay, that's a good point. It is primarily defensive players, and if it included offensive players, they probably would have been a little bit better in free agency over the years signing offensive players. Like Clint Bowling is a really good example of a guy who knows Zimmer. He played on the same team that Zimmer coached in Cincinnati. The Vikings couldn't sign him. And obviously Stephon Diggs is not like the world's largest Zimmer fan, right? And so there is potentially that. I think that the restrictions on the offense do make it difficult for offensive players to buy into Zimmer as much as defensive players do. But I think for the most part, he does have some soft skills in terms of dealing with players. And he does kind of demonstrate that, specifically dealing with his favorite position, cornerback. And it's like kind of a red flag that he's got a very obviously favorite position and he's like a head coach, like relax a little bit. But he's talked about, and it's worked, about how he has different teaching styles for every single cornerback and how he adapts his approach to every one of them differently. And that's kind of why so many of them buy into him. And that's not like the same thing as inspiring, right? A bunch of people can like you and you're not necessarily inspiring, right? But there are situations where Zimmer was the head coach and the Vikings have done some like crazy stuff, like obviously the Minneapolis Miracle. But the other game, the playoff game against instead of the Week 17, but the playoff game against New Orleans 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 2 years ago, the one where Kyle Rudolph caught the overtime touchdown. Dude, that was wild, by the way, because the Kingdom is super loud, right? Obviously. And I've been at a bunch of loud stadiums, and I've seen a bunch of loud stadiums get kind of shut up by, opposing players for whatever reason, either because the Vikings are at home and they get shut up by an opposing team, or I'm on the road and the Vikings shut them up. And I don't think it's ever been as instant as when Kyle Rudolph caught that touchdown in overtime. It was nuts.
Like every single person in attendance just said aloud, "Of course," and then that was it.
Yeah, it just deflated, right? Like it just the air got sucked out of the stadium. It was crazy. And so there are moments with the Vikings where you feel like they know how to rally, and then of course they had a hangover game against San Francisco after that. I would say that if it is a skill, and there is some debate in the analytics community about this, if it is a skill to win close games, Zimmer clearly doesn't have it, right? And whether that's because he's inspiring or not, whether it's because he's conservative as a play caller, whether it's because he doesn't understand risk tolerance, or it's because he's a bad game manager, whatever it is, he doesn't seem to have that skill. And most teams and most coaches tend to find ways around that. Like Andy Reid was not good in late game scenarios, so he just built the best offense in the history of the NFL, and so he didn't have to have late game scenarios. And then he won a Super Bowl, right? That's not really an option for Zimmer. I would argue that Zimmer has a lot of qualities of a great coach and a lot of qualities of a bad coach. And at this point in his career, they are inseparable from each other. He can't get all of the bad stuff out and only keep the great stuff, and vice versa. And so that's the issue with the fire Zimmer train, right? Is because, like you said, we've seen some really bad coaches, right? Especially through the 80s. But also even like, Brad Childress was a bad coach. Les Frazier was a bad coach. And there's a great example of a guy that people love. People love Leslie Frazier. And he's a bad coach. And so we've seen bad coaches, right? And Zimmer turned that team around really quickly in 2014, became a winning team in 2015. Like, it's nuts. And so the risk is kind of the same risk the Bengals were unprepared to take with Marvin Lewis, right? Because he consistently got them to the playoffs and then lost. The Bengals have not gotten better since then, but that doesn't mean they made the wrong decision firing Marvin Lewis. It just means they didn't make the right decision on their next couple of coaches. So the issue is it is hard to find a coach better than Zimmer, but also you have to. And so that's the problem with the fire Zimmer thing, is because it is unlikely that the next coach they hire is better than Zimmer. But it's also unlikely that Zimmer is good enough to get a ring. I've struggled with this for like the past year and a half.
Any world in which Zimmer would take his emotion to defensive coordinator?
No.
That would never happen.
He would have to get fired, and I think he would get a head coaching job if he got fired.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Kind of like Andy Reid when he got fired from the Eagles, yeah.
Do we have any other questions from the audience here? All right.
Perfect.
Go for it.
So the first one is I was at the Cowboys game, and ISM actually got on the field, as well as Nwangu, but he never made a return because they kicked it out of the back of the end zone. Why don't we see more rookies on the field, especially if certain players are not playing up to their abilities?
Yeah, it's a pretty good question, and that one I think is a little bit more difficult to answer than you'd think at first glance, because at first you just say, well, Zimmer doesn't like to play rookies. But he has played rookies in opening games. Like he's played like Eric Hendricks as a starting linebacker. He's played Anthony Barr as a starting linebacker. I mean, Eric Hendricks took like 4 games to play, but he played pretty quickly. Obviously, Stephon Diggs took a while to get on the field, but he played his rookie year a substantial amount of time. He's a 5th-round pick, right? And so he played a rookie as a 5th-round pick and stuck with him. It took a little bit too long for Justin Jefferson to see the field. Obviously, he didn't start until his 3rd game. But at the same time, I watched all those practices, and I was at training camp watching Justin Jefferson. He wasn't special in training camp. And so it made sense that he didn't start right away. But at the same time, there are a lot of instances where like you want to see a rookie play right away and they're not. I don't know if Christian Darrisaw would have started if he was healthy at the beginning of the year. I suspect maybe not. And the same thing happened with Brian O'Neill at offensive tackle. I mean, again, it was Rashad Hill playing ahead of him, and it took an injury to Rashad Hill to play Brian O'Neill. So I think it's how difficult Zimmer thinks the position is and how much of the offense they kind of like know, right? And how much they can like rattle off if you kind of ask them. And Amir Smith-Marsette's very talented, right? But it took him a while to pick up the Iowa offense. I imagine it's taking him just a little bit of time to pick up the Vikings offense. But he did see the field. So I think it's because the Vikings have so many people that are used to the system that they run, especially on defense, but on offense and defense, that the chemistry that they have is hard to break as a rookie, more than it is that Zimmer hates rookies. I think that's only true at cornerback.
And then the other one, I'll put you guys on the spot. So next season, the Vikings play Washington out here. Can we get you back out here?
That's up to James.
I like how it's up to me.
It's up to you.
It's very possible. We'll have to see. The amount of time I spent today driving around Virginia made me immediately start like real estate shopping.
Unless you want sticker shock.
Nice White House.
From what I've been told, if you can ignore the politics of DC, it's beautiful. But I've really enjoyed coming through the area so far. We're gonna have some more fun here this weekend. Heading out to James Madison University's homecoming. That'll be on Saturday. That should be entertaining for someone who I've been arguing should be listed as listed as like an honorary alum.
Honorary alum, yeah. Despite never having attended James Madison.
Despite never having attended, this man has done more to bring attention to James Madison University than any other person outside of Ben DiNucci. And that's only because of his sidearm throw. So we're gonna do that. We've had a great time so far. We're looking forward to a great Vikings appearance at on Sunday in Baltimore, and that'll be another interesting little trip. But we've got the list of places potentially for next year, and Washington has always been on my list of places to visit. So it's all things are as we like to say, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci. So we'll see what ends up happening next year. But thank you guys so much for coming out. Thank you guys so much for coming out to the taping. You guys have been great. And before we stop, Arif, what do you have to plug?
Oh, yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL, ARIF HASAN NFL. I write for The Athletic, so you can find me at theathletic.com. And if you specifically want to find my articles, it's theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan. And if you sign up for one of my articles, I get credit for it, so do that, because I like money. Other than that, not much else to plug. Just follow me on Twitter and read my stuff.
And of course, the show itself is at Norse Code DN. Thank you guys so much for coming out. Again, really appreciate it. And for Arif, my name is James, and please remember, Case Cookus, and we will be back on Sunday night to review the Ravens game.
Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.